There are lots of problems, but the problems are much, much more serious now. So let's not use the word crisis. Let's use the word catastrophe, because that's what we're looking at, even though right now, at the moment, everything seems fairly mellow. Interest rates have gone up a lot, but the interesting thing is after going down 40 some years, they were driven down in the latter part of that time by government action, government driving interest rates down in order to artificially stimulate the economy. And when that happens, it creates distortions and misallocations of capital. People do all kinds of things, stupid things, that they wouldn't do if interest rates were a normal level. Of course, we don't really even know what a normal level is anymore, because the dollar itself is a floating abstraction and losing value at anywhere from 5 to 10% per year. But who knows? Because the statistics put out by the U.S. government are only marginally more trustworthy than those put out by the Argentine government at this point. So I expect that the rest of the decade is going to be among the wildest and woolliest in our history, certainly since World War II. We're looking at a financial collapse where the stock market is in a bubble because of the low interest rates that the Fed has engineered over years. They're going up a bit now, but they're still below the level of inflation. The bond market, which is much bigger than the stock market, is in a hyper bubble at this point. And since all of real estate in the Western world, certainly in the US and Canada, rests on borrowed money, as interest rates go up, real estate's going to be hurt really badly. And as the economy slows down, the governments, state, local governments, are going to be strapped for cash because they can't print it up the way the U.S. government is. So you can expect real estate taxes to go up as well. It's a long litany. It really is. And the world is has much more debt than it did even during the crisis of the early 1980s, when interest rates were 15% and more. And the problem with debt, it's not just an academic thing. The problem with debt is that when you have savings, it's because you produced more than you consumed, and you put the difference aside. That's savings. When you have debt, it means that you've consumed more than you produced. Now, where do you get that debt from? You get it either from the past accumulated capital of others or by mortgaging your future. It's not a good thing. It's not an academic thing. The government shouldn't just reduce spending. It should radically cut spending. There are dozens, scores, maybe hundreds of agencies that should be abolished wholesale, not just cut back. Because if you cut back a government agency, it's like pruning a weed. It'll grow back stronger later on. They have to be eliminated. Most of them serve no useful purpose. In fact, it's beyond that. Most of them are actively destructive, keeping people from producing and living their lives properly. It's always been said that money makes the merry go. Stock market runs on money. And for the last 20 years, the government has been financing itself not so much with tax revenue as with printed money. Now, how does this work? Let's say the government runs $1 trillion deficit. Where does it get that money? It used to be we got it from the Germans or the Japanese or the Chinese. Not the case anymore. There are no domestic savings to finance it. So where does that money come from? It's sold to the Federal Reserve, the government deficit. And the Fed then credits the U.S. government's account at commercial banks with Federal Reserve notes, with dollars. And that's how those dollars go into society. And with the U.S. government now running consistent, not just $1 trillion deficits, but $2 trillion deficits, that much more money is flowing into society every year. Now, rich people, smart people, try to put it into real things. That means the stock market. And it's created bubbles. You remember the dot-com bubble, the internet bubble, the high-tech bubble. Booms and busts are created that way. So I'm looking for more of that type of thing. People buy, in other words, a lot of people and institutions buy stocks not because they're good values, Benjamin Graham type values. They buy them because you've got to put the money someplace, and you can't put the money in bonds. Bonds are a triple threat to your capital. They're the kiss of death today. I suspect interest rates, regardless of what the government wants, are going to go back up to the levels of the early 1980s and perhaps beyond. Sophisticated investors realize that you've got three threats when you buy bonds. You've got the default threat, which is greater and greater as the amount of debt increases. Chances are lower and lower that it's going to be repaid. The amount of debt reduces the creditworthiness of the borrowers. The second thing is the value of the currency that debt is denominated in. And as more money is printed, the money becomes worth less. So that's got to be reflected in interest rates, where people are compensated for taking those risks. Why are interest rates in Argentina something on the order of 100% per year? It's for those reasons that I just mentioned. Now, the U.S. is a vastly bigger economy. There's much more saved capital. The society is more stable. So it's taking longer for that to happen. But after having gone down for 40 years, cyclically, interest rates are going up. And it's good that interest rates go up. People don't like it because it reduces their current standard of living. When they buy a car or a house, it could cost them twice as much if they finance it than when interest rates were close to zero before. But you've got to look at the other side of this thing, which is savings. When interest rates are close to zero, why save? You have to be an idiot to save. So I expect that interest rates are going up just because we need to rebuild capital, encourage people to save. As I said, the U.S. government is running a couple $1 trillion per year of deficit. The way they're financing that deficit is by selling their debt to the Federal Reserve. So inflation is going to keep going up. It's unless we have a credit collapse. Something like recently happened with SVP and a couple of other banks. If they hadn't been bailed out by the government, agencies of the government, it could have started off an actual credit collapse where, let's say, then prices would go down. For instance, if $1 billion bond goes to zero because it can't be paid, that money dies and goes to money heaven. And that's how you can have a catastrophic deflation. So it's a very unstable system today. Frankly, the Fed shouldn't exist. People think it's part of the cosmic firmament, but it was only created in 1913, and it should be abolished because it's politicized money. People at the Fed decide interest rates should be higher or lower based upon God knows what, that the money supply should be higher or lower based on God knows what. These are things that the market should determine, that the American people should determine by their patterns of buying and selling, producing and consuming. You shouldn't have bureaucrats with this amount of power. And the amount of power that's vested in the Fed is going way, way up with the near-term arrival of central bank digital currencies. It means that your money can be in your account personally, can be controlled with the push of a button on somebody's computer. I mean, is that a good thing? I don't think so. As the Canadian truckers found out a couple of years ago, if they do naughty things or even have bad thought, it can be debited. So it's the kind of society that we want to live in, and it's evolving in the wrong direction. More government control all the time. We should have less government control, not more. Right now, the dollar is a floating abstraction, and the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve, between them, can create unlimited numbers of them, and they are in process of doing that. And if they destroy the dollar, it's going to it's probably the biggest single thing that they can do to actually destroy civilization in the U.S., starting with the people on the bottom of society who they say they want to help most. Because the only way somebody can elevate themselves is by producing more than they consume and saving the difference. That's where you build capital and become wealthy or prosperous. But if they inflate the dollar away, then the little people that try to save money, that don't have sophistication to invest, they're going to get hurt worst. The Fed was created in 1913, and it shouldn't have been created. It was unnecessary to have been created. But when it was created, the basic idea was to act as a clearinghouse for banks in the U.S. to adjust them over temporary bumps in the road where mistakes are made. But since then, it's risen to the point where it controls everything that happens in the U.S. The U.S. government is running trillion-dollar-plus deficits every year. The Chinese aren't buying that extra debt. Japanese, nobody's buying it. The Federal Reserve is buying all that debt that the U.S. government is issuing and floating the money into society at large, debasing the currency. So, look, the Fed should be abolished. It shouldn't be reformed. It should be abolished, quite frankly. And fractional reserve banking would be abolished with it. Listen, most of the guests that you have here, when you talk about economics, they say, well, I think the Fed should raise the prime rate by 1/4 point. And somebody else will say, no, they're going to reduce it by 1/2 point. This is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's ridiculous, and it's stupid, and it confirms the reality of their existence. They shouldn't have any control over interest rates. The market, the buying and selling, lending and borrowing of capital in the open market is what should control interest rates. It shouldn't be some Keynesian, educated, arbitrarily appointed people on various Federal Reserve boards. And people that try to second guess what they do and think they can succeed at it impress me as idiots. Well, if not idiots, at least fools. Central banks are a bad idea, and for central banks to have digital currencies that people are going to use is a bad idea on steroids. So, and the problem with it is that it's going to take a huge amount of agency from individuals. Right now, it's bad enough if you have dollars in a bank. The U.S. government, by going through the courts and so forth, can seal off your brokerage and bank accounts. Okay, but it's still illegal. But with a central bank digital currency, they're not only able to easily create more of them just by the punch of a computer button, but seal off your bank account, as the Canadian government did to the truckers a couple of years ago, if they're considered to be bad actors. So this is devolving huge extra power to the state. And I'm afraid that the average Westerner will say, oh, this is a good idea. They all have smartphones at this point, and they'll say, wow, this is great. I won't have to take a wallet or a credit card with me. I can just use my iPhone to buy and sell. And sure, it's easy, but they're trading what little agency and financial freedom they have left and giving it away to the government, which as far as I'm concerned, the state is a force for evil in society. It's pure coercion. And I think there's two ways that you can run society: with voluntarism being emphasized or with coercion being emphasized. And increasingly, the government, which is pure congealed coercion, is being emphasized and more important. So society is going in the wrong direction. They say 20 or 25% of the U.S. population is on psychoactive drugs to start with. I'm not talking about fun drugs like marijuana and cocaine. I'm talking about psychiatric drugs to make them, in effect, zombies. So they're kind of out of the game. Most of the U.S. population has been educated for generations by a totally corrupt school system, which has just overwhelmed them with all kinds of woke and socialist and neo-Marxist ideas where they think things that are actually wrong are beneficial and right. So no, people, and it'll look so convenient. So no, there's no hope that that's going to happen. That having been said, anybody who thinks for themselves and understands economics and history should have a significant amount of gold and silver coins in their own possession and a significant amount of Bitcoin, because I think that Bitcoin has proven itself to be a viable currency. I'm on the Bitcoin side of the equation. I think that it's going to go much higher, and I wish Nayib Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, all the best, with his having made Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. He's done many other good things in El Salvador. I mean, with a little bit of luck, he's turned it from absolutely the worst shithole in the Western Hemisphere, with the exception of Haiti, I've got to say. He's turning it around to the extent that perhaps he'll transform it into a new Hong Kong or Singapore. And having reformed the monetary system, or taken steps in that direction, is an important part of that. I hate to say this, but the U.S. has transformed itself from a nation that everybody loved, a nation of hamburgers and Beach Boys and California girls and convertible cars and rock and roll music and lots of personal freedom. It's transformed itself into the most dangerous and hated country in the world. Now, I hate to say that, but the U.S. today is not the same country that it was 50 years ago or even 10 years ago. People are afraid of it. It's out of control. And it's going to get more out of control because it is out of control. The fact that the U.S. government is, in fact, bankrupt. It has, $34 trillion debt, and that debt is growing radically. Soon, the annual deficit's going to, the deficit is we're already running over $1 trillion a year in interest alone. Spending is out of control. Regulation's out of control. We have actual Jacobins in charge in Washington, D.C. I'm not talking about, just people that are left-leaning people that have goofy ideas. I'm talking about people that are really pathological, just like the Jacobins in the 1790s, early 1790s in France after the Revolution. This is very serious.